The sun rose over the south side of Chicago, casting a golden glow on the rows of modest homes that lined the streets. It was a neighborhood where everyone knew each other, where kids played basketball in the alleys, elders sat on porches swapping stories, and life moved at its own unhurried pace. Among these residents was Evelyn Thompson, an 82-year-old woman whose presence brought warmth to those around her. Known affectionately as Miss Eve, she had lived in the same house for nearly 50 years. Her husband James had passed away 2 decades earlier, but his memory lingered in the little things: the photographs on the walls, the worn armchair by the window, and the garden he'd helped her start all those years ago. Every morning, rain or shine, Miss Eve could be found tending to her small patch of greenery outside her home. The garden wasn't much, just a few tomato plants, marigolds, and herbs, but it was her sanctuary. She loved how the soil felt beneath her fingers and how the scent of fresh mint leaves reminded her of summers long past. To her, the garden was more than plants. It was a connection to her roots, a reminder of simpler times when life wasn't so complicated. This particular morning started like any other. Miss Eve shuffled out of her front door wearing her favorite wide-brimmed straw hat, a pair of gardening gloves, and an old apron dusted with dirt. She carried a watering can filled from the hose in her backyard. As she sprinkled water onto the thirsty plants, she hummed a tune softly under her breath, a gospel song she'd learned as a child. Passers-by greeted her warmly, some stopping briefly to chat about the weather or share news of upcoming church events. Unbeknownst to Miss Eve, trouble was brewing just around the corner. Officer Marcus Dunn, a young and brash patrolman new to the district, drove slowly down the street in his squad car. His arrival in the neighborhood hadn't gone unnoticed. In the short time he'd been assigned to the area, Dunn had earned a reputation for being abrasive and quick-tempered. Residents whispered about his habit of pulling people over for minor infractions and his dismissive attitude toward their concerns. Some avoided eye contact with him altogether, while others made jokes behind closed doors about his inflated sense of authority. Today, however, Dunn wasn't focused on traffic stops or noise complaints. Instead, his attention zeroed in on Miss Eve and her watering can. Earlier that week, the city had issued a drought advisory urging residents to conserve water due to low reservoir levels. While most people complied without issue, Dunn took it upon himself to enforce the rule with military-like precision. He saw violations everywhere, even in harmless activities like washing cars or filling bird baths, and seized every opportunity to assert his dominance. As he approached Miss Eve's house, his eyes narrowed at the sight of her calmly tending to her garden. Without hesitation, he parked his car haphazardly across the street, stepped out, and marched toward her. His boots thudded heavily against the pavement, announcing his presence before he even spoke. Miss Eve glanced up, startled by the sudden intrusion. She offered a polite smile, unsure why the officer seemed so agitated. "What do you think you're doing?" Dunn barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the peaceful morning air. Miss Eve blinked, taken aback by his tone. "Good morning, officer," she said gently, setting the watering can down. "I'm just taking care of my plants. They need water to grow." "Didn't you hear about the drought advisory?" Dunn snapped, crossing his arms. "You're wasting water when the whole city is trying to save it." "Oh dear," Miss Eve replied, her expression softening. "I didn't know about that. No one told me." "Well, now you know," Dunn sneered, clearly unsatisfied with her explanation. "And since you're too old to understand, maybe this will teach you a lesson." Before Miss Eve could respond, he grabbed a half-empty bottle of water from his belt, uncapped it, and poured its contents directly over her head. The cold liquid soaked into her hat and trickled down her face. For a moment, Miss Eve stood frozen, stunned by the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to wipe the water from her cheeks. Nearby neighbors who had been watching from their windows gasped audibly, horrified by the display of cruelty. A few dared to step outside, ready to intervene, but fear held them back. Everyone knew Dunn's reputation, and no one wanted to risk becoming his next target. Dunn smirked, clearly pleased with himself. "Next time, pay attention to the rules," he said mockingly, before turning on his heel and striding back to his patrol car. He climbed inside, slammed the door shut, and sped off, leaving behind a trail of indignation and disbelief. For several minutes, Miss Eve simply stood there, dripping wet and clutching the handle of her watering can. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because of the water, but because of the humiliation she felt. She had always believed in treating others with kindness and respect, regardless of their position or power. But today, that belief had been shattered by someone who should have protected her, not degraded her. Word of the incident spread quickly. Neighbors gathered outside Miss Eve's house, offering comfort and support. One woman brought her a towel, another fetched a cup of tea. Someone suggested filming a video to document what had happened, knowing it might help bring attention to the injustice. As the camera rolled, Miss Eve recounted the story in a calm yet firm voice, her dignity intact despite everything. By the end of the day, the clip had gone viral, sparking outrage across the city and beyond. Little did anyone know this was only the beginning of a story that would shake Chicago to its core. The moment Officer Marcus Dunn drove away from Miss Evelyn Thompson's house, the neighborhood erupted into a flurry of activity. Neighbors who had witnessed the shocking scene gathered on sidewalks and front porches, their voices rising in anger and disbelief. Some were visibly upset, wiping tears from their eyes as they recounted what they'd seen. Others clenched their fists, muttering about how something needed to be done, anything, to hold Dunn accountable for his actions. The image of an elderly woman being humiliated in such a cruel manner struck a deep chord, not just within the immediate community but across the entire city. One of the first people to take action was Mrs. Patricia Lewis, a longtime friend of Miss Eve and a fiery advocate for justice. Patricia had lived 2 doors down from Evelyn for over 30 years and considered her part of the family. When she heard about the incident, she rushed over with a warm blanket and a box of tissues, determined to help her neighbor through the ordeal. But as she listened to Evelyn recount the details, Patricia realized this wasn't just a personal attack. It was symptomatic of a much larger problem. "This isn't right," Patricia said firmly, her hands resting on Evelyn's shoulders. "What he did to you was wrong, plain and simple, and if we don't speak up, it'll happen again to someone else." Evelyn hesitated, her usual calm demeanor wavering under the weight of emotion. "I'm just an old woman, Patricia," she murmured softly. "What can I do? I don't want to cause trouble." Patricia shook her head emphatically. "You're not just an old woman. You're our Miss Eve. You've been here for decades, helping everyone, giving love and kindness without asking for anything in return. That man disrespected all of us today, not just you. We won't let him get away with it." With Patricia's encouragement, the neighbors decided to document everything. A young man named Jamal, who often helped Evelyn carry groceries, pulled out his phone and filmed a short video of her talking about what happened. In the clip, Evelyn spoke calmly but with unmistakable sadness, describing how the officer poured water over her head simply because she hadn't known about the drought advisory. Her voice never wavered, and her composure made the story even more powerful. By the time Jamal uploaded the video to social media, dozens of people had already shared it within their own networks. Within hours, the video exploded online. Comments flooded in from all corners of Chicago, and soon from other cities and states. People expressed outrage at the officer's behavior, calling it disrespectful, unnecessary, and emblematic of systemic issues plaguing law enforcement. Hashtags like Justice for Evelyn and Respect Our Elders began trending, drawing attention from activists, journalists, and organizations focused on police reform. Even celebrities joined the conversation, amplifying the message and demanding accountability. As the story gained traction, local news stations picked it up, sending reporters to interview residents and capture footage of the tight-knit community, rallying around Miss Eve. One anchor described her as the heart and soul of her neighborhood, while another called the incident a stark reminder of the challenges faced by marginalized communities. The coverage brought national attention to the case, shining a spotlight on Chicago's South Side and the broader issue of racial bias in policing. Meanwhile, Officer Dunn remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. Back at the side precinct, he swaggered into the break room, boasting to his colleagues about how he'd put that old lady in her place. His tone was smug, almost gleeful, as though humiliating an 82-year-old woman was some kind of badge of honor. A few officers exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing, unwilling to challenge him directly. Dunn's commanding officer, Lieutenant Harris, however, didn't share his enthusiasm. "Dunn, my office." "Now," Harris barked, motioning for him to follow. Once inside, Harris closed the door and turned to face him, his expression grim. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, shoving a printout of the viral video across the desk. Dunn glanced at the screen, his smirk fading slightly. "It's just a little water," he shrugged. "She was wasting resources. Someone had to teach her a lesson." Harris sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "That little water has blown up online. People are calling for your badge. The mayor's office is getting calls. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the department. You need to lay low until we figure out how to handle this." But Dunn dismissed the warning, convinced that no one would actually punish him for disciplining a civilian. "They'll forget about it in a week," he said confidently. "No one cares about some old lady's garden." What Dunn didn't realize, at least not yet, was that this wasn't just any old lady. Unbeknownst to him, Miss Evelyn Thompson was the mother of Judge Daniel Thompson, one of the most respected figures in Chicago's judicial system. At that very moment, Judge Thompson was sitting in a hotel conference room hundreds of miles away, attending a legal seminar. During a break, he checked his phone and saw dozens of notifications alerting him to the viral video. Confused, he clicked on one of the links and felt his stomach drop as he watched the footage of his mother being humiliated. For several minutes, Daniel sat in stunned silence, replaying the clip over and over. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mother, gentle, kind, resilient Evelyn, standing there dripping wet, trying to maintain her dignity, while a uniformed officer mocked her. Tears welled up in his eyes, followed quickly by a surge of anger. How dare someone treat her like that? And how dare they think they could get away with it? Daniel immediately called his assistant, instructing her to book the next available flight back to Chicago. Then he phoned his mother, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked urgently. "Why didn't you tell me this happened?" Evelyn hesitated, clearly reluctant to burden her son. "I didn't want to bother you, Danny," she admitted. "It's not a big deal. These things happen." "It is a big deal," Daniel replied firmly. "No one should ever treat you or anyone like that. We're going to make sure this doesn't go unpunished." By the time Daniel landed in Chicago the following morning, the story had reached fever pitch. Protesters had gathered outside the police precinct, holding signs that read, "Protect our elders" and "Accountability now." Community leaders delivered impassioned speeches, vowing to fight for justice not only for Evelyn, but for every person who had suffered similar indignities at the hands of law enforcement. The energy was electric, a mix of frustration and hope that something meaningful might finally change. When Daniel arrived at his mother's house, he found her sitting quietly on the couch, clutching a cup of tea. Despite everything, she greeted him with a smile, her strength unwavering. "Danny, you didn't have to come all this way," she said softly. "I'm fine, really." "You shouldn't have to be fine after something like this," Daniel replied, kneeling beside her. "Mom, I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I promise you, we're going to fix this, together." As they talked, Daniel realized that his mother's experience was far bigger than either of them. It wasn't just about punishing one bad officer. It was about addressing the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to occur in the first place. With renewed determination, he vowed to use his influence to ensure that justice was served, not just for Evelyn, but for everyone who deserved to live free from fear and disrespect. Little did anyone know the wheels of change were already beginning to turn. The next morning, the city of Chicago buzzed with a sense of anticipation. The story of Miss Evelyn Thompson and Officer Marcus Dunn had reached every corner, from community centers to corporate boardrooms, from classrooms to coffee shops. People were talking about it everywhere, sharing their outrage and demanding answers. For many, this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of deeper issues within society, issues that needed to be confronted head-on. Judge Daniel Thompson wasted no time in taking action. After spending the evening comforting his mother and strategizing with trusted advisors, he decided to hold a press conference. The event was organized quickly but efficiently, thanks to the support of local activists and civil rights organizations eager to amplify Evelyn's voice. By mid-morning, reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers filled the small park near Evelyn's home, creating a sea of microphones and notebooks. When Judge Thompson stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. Dressed in a sharp suit that exuded authority, he carried himself with the poise and dignity expected of someone in his position. But today there was something different about him, an intensity in his eyes, a fire burning behind his calm exterior. He began by introducing himself and then turned the spotlight squarely on his mother. "My name is Judge Daniel Thompson," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Many of you may know me from my work in the judicial system. But today, I stand here not as a judge but as a son who watched a video of his 82-year-old mother being humiliated by a man sworn to protect her. This is not just my story. It's our story. It's the story of countless individuals who have faced similar injustices simply because of who they are." As he spoke, images of Evelyn flashed on large screens set up for the press conference. There she was, tending to her garden, smiling warmly at neighbors, living life with grace and kindness. Then came the footage of the incident, the cruel act of pouring water over her head, her quiet composure in the face of such blatant disrespect. The contrast between these images struck a chord with everyone present, drawing audible gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Daniel continued, his words carrying both sorrow and resolve. "My mother has spent her entire life giving back to this community. She raised children, cared for the sick, fed the hungry, and offered comfort to those in need. And yet, when she needed protection, she was met with cruelty. Why? Because she is elderly? Because she is black? Because she dared to tend to her garden, a symbol of life and growth in a world that often tries to suppress people like her?" The crowd erupted in applause, some people wiping away tears as they listened. Daniel paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "We cannot allow this behavior to go unchecked. We must demand accountability, not just for my mother, but for every person who has been mistreated by those entrusted with power. Today we file a formal complaint against Officer Marcus Dunn. We call for a thorough investigation into his actions and the culture that enables them, and we will not rest until justice is served." Evelyn sat quietly in the front row, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Despite the attention focused on her, she remained humble, her gaze fixed on her son with pride and gratitude. When Daniel finished speaking, he invited her to join him at the podium. Though hesitant at first, she rose slowly and stood beside him, leaning on his arm for support. The sight of the two together, mother and son, united in their quest for justice, moved many to tears. Back at the police precinct, Officer Dunn watched the press conference unfold on a small TV mounted in the break room. At first he dismissed it as typical media hype, convinced that the fuss would die down eventually. But as Judge Thompson spoke, detailing the steps they planned to take, Dunn's confidence began to waver. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his brow furrowing as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. "Wait, that's her son?" Dunn muttered under his breath, his eyes widening in shock. One of his colleagues nodded grimly, confirming the worst of his fears. "Oh no," Dunn whispered, sinking lower into his seat. "This is bad. Really bad." For the first time since the incident, Dunn realized the gravity of his mistake. Judge Daniel Thompson wasn't just any public figure. He was one of the most influential judges in Chicago, known for his fairness and integrity. More importantly, he presided over cases involving police misconduct, making him uniquely positioned to ensure accountability. If anyone could dismantle Dunn's career, it was him. Panic set in as Dunn scrambled to think of ways to mitigate the damage. He considered reaching out to apologize, but what could he possibly say to undo the harm he'd caused? He thought about resigning quietly, hoping to avoid further scrutiny, but knew that wouldn't stop the investigation already underway. Trapped in a web of his own making, Dunn felt the walls closing in around him. Meanwhile, the Chicago Police Department found itself under intense pressure. Calls for reform poured in from all directions, with critics pointing out the systemic failures that allowed officers like Dunn to act with impunity. Lieutenant Harris called an emergency meeting with top brass, urging them to address the situation transparently. "This isn't just about Dunn," he warned. "It's about us. How we respond will define how the public views this department moving forward." In response, the department launched a formal inquiry into Dunn's conduct. Investigators reviewed body cam footage, interviewed witnesses, and examined past complaints filed against him. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture: a pattern of aggressive behavior, racial profiling, and disregard for protocol. Neighbors came forward with stories of Dunn harassing residents during traffic stops or dismissing their concerns with condescension. Each new revelation added fuel to the growing fire of public outrage. As the investigation progressed, Evelyn became a reluctant symbol of resilience. Her quiet strength inspired others to share their own experiences of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. Community meetings turned into forums for healing where people aired grievances and brainstormed solutions. Activists worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going, organizing marches, vigils, and educational workshops aimed at fostering dialogue and driving change. Through it all, Evelyn remained steadfast, focusing on the bigger picture rather than personal revenge. She attended rallies alongside her son, offering words of encouragement to those struggling to find hope. "We've been through hard times before," she told a group of young protesters one afternoon. "But if we stick together and keep pushing for what's right, we can make things better, for ourselves, for our children, and for generations to come." Her message resonated deeply, uniting people across age, race, and socioeconomic lines. Even those initially skeptical of the movement found themselves drawn in by Evelyn's authenticity and determination. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn, not just in Chicago but across the country, as people recognized the importance of standing up against injustice, no matter how daunting the challenge might seem. Officer Dunn, however, couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. As evidence mounted against him, his fate became increasingly clear. Suspended without pay pending the outcome of the investigation, he retreated from public view, isolating himself from friends and family. The once cocky officer now spent his days consumed by regret, haunted by the knowledge that his arrogance had cost him everything. And yet, even as Dunn faced the repercussions of his choices, the story was far from over. For Evelyn, Daniel, and the countless others inspired by their courage, the fight for justice was only beginning. They knew that true change wouldn't happen overnight, but with persistence, unity, and unwavering faith, they believed it was possible. The investigation into Officer Marcus Dunn's conduct quickly became a high-stakes affair, drawing scrutiny from every corner of Chicago and beyond. What started as a local incident had snowballed into a national conversation about police accountability, racial bias, and the need for systemic reform. The pressure on law enforcement was immense, with activists, politicians, and ordinary citizens demanding transparency and justice. For Dunn, who once prided himself on his authority, the tables had turned dramatically. He found himself at the center of a storm he couldn't control. At the heart of the investigation were hours of body cam footage obtained from Dunn's patrol car. Initially reluctant to release the recordings, the Chicago Police Department eventually caved under mounting public pressure. When the clips were made public, they painted a damning picture of Dunn's behavior, not just toward Evelyn Thompson, but toward countless others in the community. One video showed him berating a teenage boy for playing basketball too loudly in a park. Another revealed him mocking a young mother during a traffic stop, accusing her of making excuses when her child began crying in the back seat. Each clip added another layer to the narrative that Dunn wasn't simply guilty of a single lapse in judgment. He represented a pattern of abuse that many residents had endured silently for years. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a trove of past complaints filed against Dunn by members of the community. Some dated back years, detailing allegations of verbal harassment, excessive force, and discriminatory practices. Most had been dismissed or swept under the rug due to lack of evidence or bureaucratic red tape. But now, with the weight of public opinion behind them, these cases resurfaced, forcing the department to confront its own failures in holding officers accountable. Lieutenant Harris, Dunn's commanding officer, faced tough questions during internal hearings. Why hadn't these earlier complaints been taken seriously? Why had Dunn been allowed to continue patrolling neighborhoods despite clear signs of problematic behavior? Harris struggled to defend his decisions, admitting under oath that budget cuts and staffing shortages had left little room for proper oversight. His testimony highlighted a broader issue within the system, a culture that prioritized efficiency over ethics, often at the expense of marginalized communities. Meanwhile, Judge Daniel Thompson played a pivotal role in ensuring the investigation remained transparent. Leveraging his influence, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes to push for reforms while keeping the spotlight firmly on his mother's case. He met with city officials, attended community meetings, and collaborated with civil rights organizations to draft policy recommendations aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. His efforts earned widespread praise, not only for their effectiveness, but also for their sincerity. Unlike some public figures who might have sought personal glory, Daniel remained humble, consistently redirecting attention to the larger cause. For Evelyn Thompson, the process was emotionally taxing. While she appreciated the outpouring of support, reliving the humiliation of that day over and again took its toll. She spent long nights sitting alone in her living room, staring out the window as memories replayed in her mind. Yet, despite her pain, she refused to retreat into silence. Instead, she leaned on her faith and the strength of her community, finding solace in knowing that her ordeal was sparking meaningful change. One evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch watching the sunset, a group of neighbors approached her with a small token of appreciation, a handmade quilt stitched together by women from the neighborhood. Each square featured vibrant patterns and colors, symbolizing unity and resilience. "This is for you, Miss Eve," said Patricia Lewis, presenting it to her with a warm smile. "It's our way of saying thank you for standing tall, for inspiring us, and for reminding us that we're stronger together." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she accepted the gift. "I don't know what I did to deserve all this love," she whispered, clutching the quilt tightly, "but I'm grateful for each and every one of you." As the investigation neared its conclusion, the findings left no room for ambiguity. Officer Marcus Dunn was found guilty of multiple counts of misconduct, including assault and violating civil rights. In a rare move, the police department announced his immediate termination, citing gross negligence and unbecoming behavior. Criminal charges soon followed, with Dunn facing trial for his actions against Evelyn and other victims. Though legal proceedings would take months to resolve, the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Dunn was guilty, and his career in law enforcement was over. Dunn's downfall sent shockwaves through the precinct. Some officers expressed relief, acknowledging privately that his behavior had long been a source of embarrassment. Others defended him half-heartedly, arguing that he'd been singled out unfairly. But even among his staunchest supporters, there was an undeniable sense of unease, a recognition that his case exposed deep flaws within the system they served. In response to the backlash, the Chicago Police Department implemented sweeping changes designed to rebuild trust with the community. Mandatory sensitivity training programs were introduced, emphasizing cultural awareness and de-escalation techniques. Independent oversight committees were established to review complaints against officers, ensuring investigations remained impartial. And perhaps most significantly, new guidelines were enacted to prevent abuse of power, including stricter penalties for violations of protocol. These reforms didn't happen overnight. nor did they erase decades of mistrust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. But they marked a crucial step forward, a commitment to doing better, however imperfectly. Residents welcomed the changes cautiously, hopeful that this time, promises would translate into action. For Evelyn, the Ejibe resolution brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, she felt vindicated, knowing that justice had been served. On the other, she mourned the loss of innocence, the realization that cruelty like Dunn's existed in the world. Still, she chose to focus on the positive outcomes. The unity forged among neighbors, the courage shown by those who spoke out, and the hope ignited in hearts across the city. Her son, Daniel, shared her optimism. "This isn't the end," he told her one evening as they sat together on the porch. "It's the beginning. Change doesn't happen all at once, but every step counts. And because of you, Mom, we've taken a big one." Evelyn smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I just want people to remember," she said softly, "that kindness matters. Respect matters. If we can teach that, then maybe, things will get better." And with that, she rose from her chair, wrapping the quilt around her shoulders like armor. As she walked back inside, her silhouette framed by the fading light, it was clear that Evelyn Thompson wasn't just a survivor. She was a beacon of hope, proof that even in the face of adversity, grace and resilience could pave the way for transformation. Months had passed since the incident involving Miss Evelyn Thompson and Officer Marcus Dunn, but the echoes of that day continued to reverberate through Chicago's South Side and far beyond. The neighborhood, once defined by its quiet resilience, had transformed into a symbol of courage and collective action. People who had once felt powerless now stood taller, emboldened by the realization that their voices mattered. And at the heart of it all was Evelyn herself, a woman whose humility and grace inspired countless others to believe in the possibility of change. The community decided to honor Evelyn with a ceremony, an event organized not just to celebrate her strength, but also to acknowledge the progress they'd made together. Held in the same park where Judge Daniel Thompson had delivered his impassioned speech months earlier, the gathering drew hundreds of people, neighbors, activists, city officials, and even strangers who had followed Evelyn's story from afar. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, bearing messages like, "Respect our elders," "Justice for all," and "Together we rise." Children ran around laughing, while elders sat in folding chairs, sharing stories and snacks. It was a celebration of life, resilience, and unity. Evelyn arrived dressed in her Sunday best, a floral print dress paired with her favorite wide-brimmed hat. She walked slowly, leaning on Daniel's arm as applause erupted from the crowd. Smiling shyly, she waved to the cheering faces, visibly moved by the outpouring of love. When it came time for speeches, Daniel stepped up to the microphone, his presence commanding yet warm. "Today is about my mother," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But it's also about every person here and every person watching from afar. My mother didn't ask for this fight, but when it came to her doorstep, she stood firm, not just for herself, but for all of us. She reminded us that dignity cannot be taken away unless we allow it, and today we honor her spirit by continuing the work she started." As Daniel spoke, images of Evelyn flashed on a large screen behind him. There she was tending to her garden, smiling at neighbors, speaking at rallies. Each photo captured a moment of quiet determination, a testament to her unwavering faith in humanity. By the time Daniel finished, the audience was on its feet, clapping and cheering so loudly that Evelyn herself wiped away tears. When Evelyn finally took the stage, the crowd fell silent, hanging on to her every word. Clutching the quilt gifted to her by her neighbors, she spoke softly but with profound clarity. "I never thought I'd see so many people come together for someone like me," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But you've shown me that kindness still exists in this world. You've shown me that when we stand together, there's nothing we can't overcome." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. She ended her speech with a simple plea. "Let's keep treating each other with love and respect." Let's remember that we're all human beings, deserving of care and compassion. If we do that, we'll leave this world better than we found it. The ceremony concluded with music, laughter, and shared meals, a reminder of the joy that could emerge from even the darkest moments. For Evelyn, the day wasn't just about recognition, it was about closure. Though scars remained from the ordeal, she felt lighter, freer, knowing that her experience had sparked something meaningful. Officer Marcus Dunn, meanwhile, faced a very different reality. After being fired from the police force and convicted of assault and civil rights violations, he disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated that he had moved to a small town in another state, working odd jobs under the radar. Life as he knew it was over. No longer shielded by a badge or uniform, Dunn struggled to find purpose in a world that viewed him as a pariah. Some nights he lay awake replaying the events of that fateful morning, the look of shock and hurt on Evelyn's face, the sound of her quiet composure cutting through his arrogance. Regret gnawed at him, though whether it stemmed from genuine remorse or fear of consequences remained unclear. Dunn's downfall served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and prejudice. Local media outlets revisited his case periodically, using it as a lens to examine broader issues within law enforcement. Training programs across the country incorporated his story into their curricula, urging officers to reflect on the impact of their actions. While some dismissed these efforts as performative, others embraced them as opportunities for growth, vowing to uphold the values of fairness and integrity that Dunn had so blatantly disregarded. Back in the South Side neighborhood, life slowly returned to normal, but with noticeable differences. Residents reported feeling safer and more respected by patrol officers, many of whom now approached them with genuine warmth rather than suspicion. Community policing initiatives gained traction, fostering partnerships between law enforcement and local leaders. Monthly meetings provided a platform for residents to voice concerns and collaborate on solutions, ensuring accountability remained a priority. Evelyn's garden flourished once again, its vibrant blooms a testament to renewal and perseverance. Neighbors often stopped by to chat or lend a hand, transforming the space into a communal hub. Children planted seeds alongside her, learning valuable lessons about patience, care, and growth. To Evelyn, the garden represented more than plants. It symbolized hope, a living reminder that even in the harshest conditions, beauty could emerge. Daniel, too, found renewed purpose in his work. Inspired by his mother's courage, he championed legislative reforms aimed at addressing systemic inequities. His courtroom became a place not just for judgment, but for healing, where victims of injustice were met with empathy and understanding. He frequently visited schools and community centers, encouraging young people to pursue careers in law and advocacy. "Change starts with you," he would tell them. "Don't wait for someone else to fix what's broken. Be the ones to make it right." As autumn settled over Chicago, painting the trees with hues of orange and gold, Evelyn spent her days much as she always had, tending to her garden, sipping tea on her porch, and greeting neighbors with a smile. But something had shifted within her. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, unshaken by the trials she'd endured. Her faith in humanity, though tested, remained intact. One crisp afternoon, as she sat watching children play tag in the street, a young girl approached her shyly. "Miss Eve?" the child asked, holding out a daisy she'd picked from the garden. "This is for you. Thank you for teaching us how to be brave." Evelyn accepted the flower with a smile, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for reminding me why it's worth it," she replied gently. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the rustle of leaves, Evelyn realized that her journey hadn't been in vain. Though the road had been difficult, it had led to something beautiful, a community united, hearts mended, and futures brightened. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, she knew that the seeds of change she'd helped plant would continue to grow for generations to come.